Catherine Sterling did not deal in sentiment. She dealt in assets, liabilities, and the clean, brutal arithmetic that separated the two. From her 40th floor office, the city below was a grid of opportunities and expenses, a chessboard where she moved properties like pawns. Her gaze fell upon a line item on the oversized monitor before her, a minor annoyance in a portfolio worth billions. It was designated Asset 22B-L, a leased, single-story garage on a parcel of land her company, Sterling Capital, had acquired in a larger portfolio purchase. The land itself was valuable, zoned for commercial high-rise development. The lease, a legacy agreement from the previous owner, was a pittance. The tenant was a nobody. "David," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the office. Her assistant, David Chen, materialized at her elbow almost instantly, a slim tablet in hand. He was young, sharp, and possessed a preternatural ability to anticipate her needs, a quality she valued precisely because it saved her time. Asset 22B-L. The garage lease in the industrial sector. What's the termination clause? David swiped through a few screens. 30 days notice for non-renewal, Madam Sterling. However, there's a redevelopment clause, Article 7, Section 4. If the landlord presents certified plans for demolition and redevelopment, the lease can be terminated with 7 days' notice. Good, she said. It was not a question. Draft the notice. Find a boilerplate demolition plan from the archives. I want that lot cleared. We have a preliminary inquiry from the Zayad Group for that entire block, and I will not have a greasy mechanics shop complicating the valuation. She looked out the window, her eyes already on the next move, the next acquisition. The fate of the garage's tenant did not occupy a single neuron in her brain beyond his classification as a temporary obstruction. The tenant's name is Elias Vance, David offered, a flicker of professional diligence crossing his features. He's been there for 6 years. Always paid on time. Catherine turned her head slowly, fixing him with a look that was neither hot nor cold, but simply devoid of interest. Is his name on the deed to the property, David? No, Madam Sterling. Then his name is irrelevant. Send the notice. I want him and his junk gone by next Friday. She turned back to her monitor, the matter concluded. The pawn had been cleared from the board. 2 days later, Elias Vance held the crisp, corporate letterhead in his grease-stained fingers. The paper felt alien in his workshop, a sterile intrusion into a world of oil, steel, and meticulous order. He stood in the center of the garage, a space that was less a building and more an extension of his own mind. Every tool had its place, hung on pegboards in a precise, logical silhouette. Racks of labeled drawers contained bolts, bearings, and gaskets sorted by size and material. On the hydraulic lift sat the half-disassembled frame of a 1968 Brough Superior motorcycle, its engine block resting on a clean bench nearby, its intricate components laid out on a lint-free cloth like surgical instruments. Elias was not a greasy mechanic. He was a restorer, a machinist, an engineer. He brought things back from the dead. His daughter, Lily, a serious 7-year-old with her mother's dark eyes, sat at a small, sturdy wooden desk he had built for her in the corner. She was not drawing flowers or houses. She was carefully sketching the gear set of a transmission from a diagram in one of his old textbooks. She looked up, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere. What's that paper, Papa? Elias folded the letter and slid it into the pocket of his worn flannel shirt. The quiet hum of his life, a rhythm he had so carefully constructed, had just been interrupted by a discordant note. It's just a letter, sweet pea, he said, his voice calm and low. From the people who own the building. He did not show the worry. He did not show the anger. He simply absorbed the fact, processed it as he would any other piece of data. 7 days. He had 7 days to dismantle a life. He looked around the garage, at the custom-built jigs, the calibrated lathes, the years of accumulated, specific tools that allowed him to work miracles on metal. This was not just a place of business, it was his sanctuary. It was the place he had rebuilt himself after his wife, Elena, was gone. It was the place he could be both a father and a craftsman, where Lily could be close to him, safe within the orbit of his quiet, focused work. He had chosen this life, this deliberate obscurity, turning his back on a world that had once promised him everything and then taken the most important part of it away. The world he had left behind was one of jet fuel and carbon fiber, of wind tunnels and fractional tolerances. Before the garage, before Lily was his entire world, Elias Vance had been the lead chassis dynamics engineer for Vanguard Dynamics. It was not a household name like Ford or General Motors. It was a place spoken of in hushed, reverent tones by people who understood the bleeding edge of automotive design. Vanguard did not build cars for the masses, they built technological manifestos on wheels, limited-run hypercars for discerning collectors and racing teams. Elias's name was on 3 patents for active suspension systems and another for a method of bonding dissimilar composite materials that had revolutionized torsional rigidity. He had been a prodigy, a rising star. Then the buyout happened. A massive, soulless conglomerate, Sterling Capital's primary competitor, had swallowed Vanguard whole. They had promised to preserve the brand's integrity, a promise that lasted until the ink was dry on the contracts. They saw the patents, the technology, the brilliant minds like Elias, and saw only assets to be stripped and liquidated. The new management, men in sharp suits who could not tell a wishbone suspension from a leaf spring, saw the R&D department not as an engine of innovation, but as a cost center. The culture of craftsmanship was replaced by a culture of quarterly reports. During that same tumultuous year, Elena had gotten sick. The sterile, impersonal nature of the corporate takeover mirrored the cold, clinical progression of her illness. While his professional world was being dismantled by men who valued spreadsheets over engineering, his personal world was being taken from him by a force he could not analyze, fix, or fight. The day after Elena's funeral, he had walked into the gleaming, soulless new office that had replaced his workshop, looked at the plastic motivational posters on the wall, and resigned. He took his savings, his grief, and his 2-year-old daughter, and he disappeared. He found this small garage, a place where the work was real, where his hands could create tangible value, and where he could build a quiet, protected life for Lily. Now, that quiet life was threatened by another piece of corporate paper. He pulled the letter from his pocket and read it again. Sterling Capital. The name was vaguely familiar, one of the sharks that circled the same waters as the one that had devoured Vanguard. He felt a familiar weariness, but underneath it, something else stirred. A cold, quiet resolve. He would not be broken by this. He was an engineer. Every problem had a solution. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he had not called in months. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Elias. To what do I owe the honor? Don't tell me you finally decided to sue that guy who brought you a counterfeit Ducati. Marcus, Elias said, his voice steady. I need some advice. Marcus Thorne had been his classmate in engineering school before a crisis of conscience and a love of argument had sent him to law school. He was now a partner in a boutique corporate law firm, a shark of his own, but one who fought on the side of the builders and creators against the takers. He was one of the few people who knew the full story of Elias's past. Elias explained the situation, reading the key phrases from the termination letter. He did not embellish. He did not complain. He stated the facts. Marcus was silent on the other end for a long moment. Sterling Capital, Marcus said, his tone shifting from friendly to predatory. Catherine Sterling's outfit. She's a scorched earth operator, Elias. She buys undervalued land, strips it, and flips it. This is her standard playbook. The redevelopment clause is ironclad. They'll have a surveyor out there on Monday and bulldozers by Wednesday. Legally, your position is weak. I understand, Elias said. He was not looking for a legal fight he could not win. He was looking at the bigger picture. He walked to the open bay door of his garage. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt. Next to his small building, separated by a chain-link fence choked with weeds, loomed a much larger structure. It was a ghost, a relic of a different era. A massive, 4-story brick factory, its windows boarded up or broken, its facade stained with decades of grime and neglect. It had been empty for as long as he had been there, a silent, hulking neighbor. Marcus, Elias said slowly, his eyes tracing the roofline of the old factory. Who owns the building next door? The big 1-inch. There was a pause, then the sound of furious typing. Let me see. Property records. Parcel 9B. Marcus's voice was tight with interest. Well, what do you know? It's the same owner. Sterling Capital. They've been trying to unload it for years. It's a registered brownfield site. Major environmental cleanup required. It's a massive liability on their books. Why? Elias did not answer immediately. He was remembering something. Years ago, before Vanguard, he had been an intern at a small aerospace firm. He had studied the history of local industrial sites for a project. He remembered this factory. It wasn't just a textile mill or a cannery. It had a specific history. That building, Elias said, was the old Ethelred Aeronautics plant. They made gyroscopic stabilizers for military and early commercial jets in the 50s and 60s. Okay, Marcus said, not yet seeing the connection. So it's old. They worked with beryllium alloys and mercury, Elias continued, his voice quiet with dawning realization. The work required absolute environmental stability. Vibration damping. Climate control. They would have built a reinforced substructure, isolated from the main building. A clean room. A vault. Marcus was silent. He was starting to understand. You think it's still there? A structure like that? It's cheaper to wall it off than to demolish it, Elias murmured, his mind racing. And the power infrastructure. To run the equipment they had, they would have needed dedicated high-capacity transformers and direct feeds from the substation. Over-engineered for its time. They wouldn't have ripped that out. It's buried in concrete. He looked at the derelict giant, and he did not see a ruin. He saw a hidden fortress of technology. He saw potential that a balance sheet could never quantify. Marcus, he said, his tone shifting. It was the same tone he used when he had solved a complex engineering problem. I want you to do something for me. I want you to draw up an offer to buy that factory. From Sterling Capital. Marcus let out a short, sharp laugh. Elias, you want to buy a toxic waste dump from the woman who is kicking you out of your garage. What are you going to offer her? A perfectly restored BSA Gold Star. Offer them $10,000, Elias said, ignoring the joke. But, he added, the crucial piece clicking into place, the offer is contingent on our assumption of all current and future environmental and remediation liabilities. Full indemnification. The line went quiet for a full 10 seconds. Marcus was no longer laughing. He was processing the cold, brutal genius of the move. Catherine Sterling saw a multi-million-dollar cleanup liability. Elias was offering to take that liability off her hands, to turn a massive negative on her books into a small, clean positive. To a mind like hers, obsessed with quarterly reports, the appeal would be immense. It would look like she was getting paid to take out the trash. My God, Elias, Marcus whispered. You're a bastard. I love it. I'll have the offer drawn up and messengered to their corporate counsel by morning. But are you sure? This is a huge risk. It's a calculated one, Elias replied, looking at Lily, who was now carefully wiping down a wrench with a clean rag, mimicking her father. He had to do this. Not just for him, but for her. To show her that you do not have to be broken by the world. You just have to see it differently. Calculate the odds, then build a better machine. The offer landed on David Chen's desk the next morning. He almost discarded it as a crank proposal. $10,000 for a property valued in the millions, even in its derelict state. But then he saw the clause about liability. He read it twice. Full assumption of all environmental responsibilities. He ran the numbers. The estimated cleanup cost, which Sterling Capital had been putting off for years, was projected at a low of $3 million and could easily balloon to $5 million. This offer wasn't for $10,000. Effectively, it was an offer to save the company $3 to $5 million, plus the annual carrying costs and the legal exposure. He took it to Catherine Sterling. She was in a foul mood, having just lost a bidding war for a tech firm. She glanced at the offer with disdain. Vance. The garage tenant, she scoffed. Is this a joke? Is he trying to be a nuisance? I don't think so, Madam Sterling, David said carefully. Look at Article 3. The liability assumption. Our own internal estimates put the remediation cost at over $3 million. This offer takes that entire liability off our books, and we get $10,000 for our trouble. It cleans up the portfolio for the Zayad Group sale. Catherine paused. Her eyes narrowed, rereading the clause. The anger in her face was replaced by a flicker of cunning. She saw the mechanic, a man she pictured as covered in grease and ignorance, trying to play hardball and failing spectacularly. She imagined he saw the big factory and had some foolish, romantic notion of expanding his little shop. He had no idea what a brownfield site entailed. He was a fool, offering to take her biggest headache off her hands for the price of a used car. The sheer hubris of it delighted her. She would get rid of the tenant, unload her most toxic asset, and clear the way for her billion-dollar deal, all in one clean transaction. He's a fool, she said with a thin, predatory smile. And we should never interrupt an opponent making a mistake. David, accept the offer. Use our fastest closing service. I want this done by Friday. And make sure the eviction notice for the garage is enforced on schedule. I want him out of there first. It was a final, petty twist of the knife. She wanted to see him standing on the curb with his boxes before he could even set foot in his new, worthless prize. David felt a pang of something, perhaps pity. He had seen Elias Vance during the brief property inspection. The man was quiet, his eyes intelligent. He wore worn boots and a flannel shirt, but his hands were clean, his fingernails immaculate. He did not look like a fool. But his job was not to question, it was to execute. He made the call. The week was a blur of controlled chaos. While Marcus's paralegals rushed the paperwork for the factory sale, Elias began the methodical process of packing his garage. He did not pack like a man being evicted. He packed like an engineer archiving a project. Each custom tool was cleaned, oiled, and placed in a custom-built, foam-lined crate. He took high-resolution photographs of his workshop's layout, of the pegboard walls, of the shelving systems. He was not just packing his possessions, he was backing up his entire workflow. Lily helped, labeling small boxes with a serious, focused expression. She seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, not as a tragedy, but as a transition. On Friday afternoon, a uniformed security guard from Sterling Capital arrived, accompanied by a tow truck driver. The guard held a clipboard. You need to be off the premises, sir. It's 5 o'clock. Elias nodded. He gestured to the empty space. Everything was gone, loaded onto 3 flatbed trucks he had hired. The Brough Superior frame was wrapped and strapped down like a sleeping giant. The only things left were a broom and a dustpan. Elias had just finished sweeping the floor. He always left a workspace cleaner than he found it. The guard looked around, surprised. He had expected a confrontation, a mess. Okay, then, he said, slightly flustered. Just need you to sign here, acknowledging you vacated. Elias signed the form. He picked up Lily, who wrapped her arms around his neck. He gave the empty garage one last look, then walked away without a word. He did not look back. He parked across the street with Lily, in his simple, clean pickup truck, and they watched as a man in a cheap suit, probably a low-level manager from Sterling, arrived and ceremoniously placed a large padlock on the garage door. The manager took a photo with his phone, likely to send to his boss as proof of a job well done. As the manager drove off, Marcus's sleek sedan pulled up behind Elias's truck. He got out, a leather portfolio in his hand, a wide grin on his face. Happy Friday, he said. He handed the portfolio to Elias. Inside was a thick stack of documents and a single, old-fashioned brass key. Congratulations, Mr. Vance. You are now the proud, and fully liable, owner of the Ethelred Aeronautics plant. The transfer was recorded at 4:47 p.m. Elias took the key. It felt heavy, real. He looked from the small, padlocked garage to the colossal brick behemoth looming beside it. One chapter had ended. The next was about to begin. He started his truck. Let's go home, Papa, Lily said, her voice sleepy. We will, Elias said, looking at the factory. We're going to build a new one. The weekend was spent in a small, clean apartment Elias rented. On Monday morning, he returned to the industrial park. He did not go to the padlocked garage. He walked to the chain-link fence surrounding the factory, the one he had stared through just days before. He used a pair of bolt cutters from his truck to snip the rusted padlock on the gate, replacing it with a new, heavy-duty one. He walked across the weed-choked yard, the brass key in his hand, and stood before a massive, steel-reinforced door. The key slid into the lock with a grating sound. It took both hands and all his strength to turn, but with a deep, groaning clank, the tumblers yielded. The door swung inward into darkness. A wave of cool, musty air washed over him, a smell of concrete, dust, and dormant machinery. He stepped inside, using a powerful flashlight from his belt to cut through the gloom. The beam illuminated a vast, cavernous space. Dust motes danced like stars in the single shaft of light. The floor was littered with debris, but Elias's eyes looked past it. He saw the bones of the building. Massive, I-beam pillars rose to a ceiling lost in shadow, 50 feet above. Along the walls, he could see the armored conduits he had anticipated, thick as a man's arm, carrying power loads that could run a small town. He walked deeper into the factory, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He followed a map he had memorized from the old city plans. He passed rows of rusted lockers and a foreman's office with a calendar still turned to October 1978. He ignored it all. He was looking for something specific. He came to a solid brick wall in the center of the main floor, a wall that did not appear on the original building schematics he had found in the city archives. It was newer construction, maybe 30 or 40 years old. He ran his hand over the bricks. They were cold. He tapped them with the butt of his flashlight. Most of the wall sounded solid, but near the floor in one corner, he heard a faint, telltale hollowness. He went back to his truck and returned with a sledgehammer and a pry bar. The first swing of the hammer sent a spiderweb of cracks through the mortar. The second broke a brick loose. Behind it was not more brick, but a thick layer of industrial insulation. Behind the insulation was a gleam of stainless steel. Elias worked methodically for the next hour, not with brute force, but with calculated precision, widening the hole, removing bricks, and peeling back the insulation. He uncovered a heavy, windowless steel door with a wheel-like handle, the kind found on a bank vault or a submarine. It had been walled off, hidden from view, forgotten. He put his shoulder to the wheel. It was frozen with age. He went back to his truck again and returned with a can of penetrating oil and a long-handled wrench, which he used to get more leverage. With a piercing shriek of tortured metal, the wheel began to turn. He spun it until he heard a series of heavy, satisfying clunks as the locking pins retracted within the door. He pulled the heavy steel door open. The air that drifted out was different. It was cool, dry, and sterile. He stepped through the doorway and swept his flashlight beam across the room. It was exactly as he had hoped. He was standing in a Class 1000 clean room, a cube of technology preserved in a tomb of brick. Stainless steel workbenches lined the walls. Filtered air vents dotted the ceiling. And against the far wall, under dusty plastic sheets, were the unmistakable shapes of high-precision machinery, a 5-axis CNC mill, a coordinate measuring machine, and an electron beam welder. These were not machines you found in a local shop. This was the kind of equipment that national labs and aerospace contractors used. It was obsolete by modern standards, but to a man like Elias, it was a foundation of priceless, salvageable potential. The conglomerate that had bought Ethelred had seen these as scrap, too expensive to move, and had simply walled them in. He spent the rest of the day exploring his new domain. He found the main power distribution center. The transformers were ancient but built like tanks. The switchgear was heavy copper, tarnished but not corroded. He found the building's original blueprints, rolled up in a waxed canvas tube in a dry records room. They were not just drawings, they were a complete operational manual for the entire facility. He had not bought a ruin, he had acquired a dormant technological giant. That night, he made 3 phone calls. The first was to a woman named Anya Petrova, a master of materials science who had been his colleague at Vanguard. After the buyout, she had been relegated to teaching community college chemistry. "Anya," he said. "Do you remember the composite bonding formula we were working on? The one for the VT-7 project?" "I dream about it sometimes," she replied, her voice heavy with the weariness of unfulfilled potential. "I have a laboratory where we can perfect it," Elias said. "And an electron beam welder to test the seams." Silence. "Then, where, Elias?" The second call was to Ben Carter, a grizzled, genius-level machinist who could make a lathe sing. The conglomerate had forced him into early retirement. "Ben," Elias said. "I have a LeBlanc 5-axis mill from 1975. The controller is shot, but the bones are good. Think you can retrofit it with a modern interface?" A low chuckle came from the other end. A75 LeBlond. Son, for a machine like that, I'd come out of retirement and work for free. The third call was to a young software prodigy, a kid named Kenji Tanaka, who had been a junior engineer at Vanguard, fired in the first round of cuts for being redundant. Kenji, I need you to write control software for a suite of analog machines. I need them to talk to each other and operate with sub-micron precision. That's the dream job, Kenji stammered. Is this for real? The work will be hard, and the pay will be low to start, Elias told each of them. I can't promise you wealth. But I can promise you a chance to build something again. Something real. None of them hesitated. They were tired of the corporate world, of being treated as disposable cogs. They, like Elias, craved the satisfaction of tangible creation. By the end of a week, a small, elite team was assembled. They were the discarded geniuses the master craftsmen put out to pasture. They were the soul of Vanguard Dynamics, reunited in a dusty old factory. The next 6 months were a montage of focused, relentless work. There was no corporate oversight, no marketing department, no committee meetings. There was only the work. They started with the basics. They hauled out tons of debris. They patched the roof. They replaced the thousands of broken window panes with modern, insulated glass. Elias, using the original blueprints, traced the building's plumbing and electrical systems. He found a series of deep artesian wells on the property, which had provided the ultra-pure water for Ethelred's original processes. With a new pump and a modern filtration system, they had a source of cooling and processing water that was virtually free. Ben Carter treated the old LeBlond mill like a holy relic, lovingly disassembling it, cleaning every gear, replacing every bearing, and, with Kenji's help, retrofitting it with a state-of-the-art control system of their own design. Anya Petrova, in her resurrected clean room, began experimenting with composite materials, laying up carbon fiber and exotic alloys in ways that no one else had ever considered. Elias was the conductor of this symphony of renewal, his calm presence and deep knowledge guiding the entire project. He could be found rewiring a 480-volt panel in the morning, troubleshooting a line of Kenji's code in the afternoon, and helping Anya calculate thermal expansion coefficients in the evening. Lily was a constant, quiet presence. She had her own small desk in the main office they had established, overlooking the factory floor. She did her schoolwork, read books, and sometimes, she would bring her father a cup of coffee or simply sit and watch him work, her expression one of deep, unwavering faith. The factory was not a loud or dangerous place. It was a place of quiet, focused creation. The hum of the reactivated machinery was the building's new heartbeat. They named their new enterprise simply, Vance Precision. They were not building cars. The market was too crowded, the capital requirements too high. Elias had a different plan. Using Anya's revolutionary composite formulas and the extreme precision of their refurbished machines, they started producing something small, complex, and in high demand, custom-designed turbine blades for high-performance industrial and aerospace applications. These were components that had to withstand incredible temperatures and stresses, where a flaw measured in microns could lead to catastrophic failure. The world's leading manufacturers, like General Electric and Rolls-Royce, produced them in mass quantities. But there was a niche market for custom, small batch, and experimental designs that the big players were too slow and too bureaucratic to serve. Their first product was a set of turbine blades for a new type of distributed power generator being developed by a Swiss engineering firm. The design was complex, the material science was challenging, and every other company that had tried to fabricate them had failed. Vance Precision produced a flawless prototype set in 3 weeks. Marcus Thorne, who had been handling the legal and financial structure of the new company, leveraged this initial success. He knew that a quiet demonstration was worth more than 1,000 press releases. He arranged a meeting, not with the Swiss firm's purchasing department, but with its legendary, notoriously difficult head of engineering, a man named Dr. Alistair Finch. Finch was a purist, an engineer of the old school who despised marketing and valued only results. They did not fly to Switzerland. They flew Finch to them. He arrived at the factory, a stern, imposing man in his late 60s, expecting to see a state-of-the-art facility. Instead, he saw a refurbished brick building staffed by a handful of people. His skepticism was palpable. Elias did not give him a presentation. He simply handed him the prototype turbine blade and a micrometer. Finch spent the next hour in silence, examining the blade. He measured it. He tapped it, listening to its ring. He took it into Anya's lab and looked at it under a microscope. Finally, he returned to the office, the blade in his hand. He looked at Elias, then at the team assembled behind him. "The geometry is perfect," he said, his voice thick with grudging admiration. "The material density is uniform to a degree I did not think was possible." "How?" Elias simply gestured to the factory floor below them. "We have good tools," he said. "And good people." Finch was not a man given to sentiment, but he recognized mastery when he saw it. "The big firms told me this design was impossible to fabricate at this tolerance," he said. "They offered to simplify it for me." He looked at Elias. "What is your production capacity?" "For this part?" "With our current setup, we can produce 500 units a month," Elias replied. "I need 10,000 units over the next 2 years, Finch stated. "And I need a second, more complex design prototyped within 6 months, he named a price per unit that made Marcus Thorne's eyebrows shoot up. It was a company-making contract. "We can do that," Elias said calmly, as if Finch had just asked for the time. "But we will require a 30% advance to scale our production line." Finch nodded. "Done." He placed the blade on Elias's desk. "Welcome to the aerospace industry, Mr. Vance. Try not to be as disappointing as everyone else." The initial wire transfer from the Swiss company was for $12 million. It arrived in Vance Precision's bank account the following Tuesday. With it, they did not buy corporate jets or fancy offices. They bought a new, larger autoclave. They hired a dozen more skilled technicians, many of them former Vanguard employees Elias tracked down. They paid off the small business loan Marcus had arranged for them. And Elias bought the empty lot next door, the one where his old garage had stood. Meanwhile, in her high-rise fortress, Catherine Sterling was celebrating. The Zayat Group deal had closed. They had purchased the entire block of land for a staggering sum. Clearing the small liabilities, like the derelict factory, had been a key factor in the smooth, profitable transaction. She had taken a worthless portfolio, cleaned it up, and sold it for a massive profit. She felt invincible. She had even made $10,000 off that fool in the garage. Her victory lap was interrupted by David Chen. He stood at her door, his face pale, holding a tablet. "Madam Sterling," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "There is something you need to see." "If it's not a bottle of champagne, I'm not interested, David," she said, waving him away. "It's about the European aerospace contract," he persisted. "The one our Apex Dynamics subsidiary was bidding on." Apex was a company Sterling Capital had acquired, a bloated, inefficient firm that was supposed to be their entry into the lucrative aerospace components market. Catherine's good mood soured. "Don't tell me we lost it." "I told Henderson to get that contract at any cost." "We did lose it," David said. "It was awarded to a new company. A startup." He placed the tablet on her desk. Displayed on the screen was a short article from a highly exclusive, subscription-only aerospace industry journal. The headline read, "Newcomer Vance Precision Stuns Industry with Landmark Turbine Contract." Catherine stared at the name. Vance. The name was a mosquito buzzing at the edge of her memory. Vance. "The location of their facility is what's interesting," David said, swiping to a satellite image. It showed a refurbished brick factory. Next to it was a large, empty lot, and next to that, a brand new, gleaming high-rise construction site bearing the Zayat Group logo. Her project. Her victory. And right in the middle of it, the factory she had sold for pocket change. The blood drained from Catherine's face. The champagne flute suddenly felt very cold in her hand. "No," she whispered. She snatched the tablet and read the article. It detailed the unprecedented quality of the components, the revolutionary material science, and the genius-level engineering team, many of them alumni of the legendary Vanguard Dynamics. It quoted Dr. Alastair Finch, a man who never gave quotes, calling Vance Precision a beacon of true engineering in a sea of corporate mediocrity. "Show me the sale agreement for that factory," she commanded, her voice dangerously quiet. David, anticipating this, brought it up on the screen. The buyer, Vance Precision, LLC. The price, $10,000. The signatory for the buyer, Elias Vance. And there, in stark black and white, was the clause she had been so proud of, the one that made her feel so clever. Buyer assumes all environmental and remediation liabilities, indemnifying the seller in perpetuity. He hadn't been a fool stumbling into a toxic waste dump. He had been a grandmaster, and she hadn't even realized they were playing chess. He had known. He had known what was in that building. The rage came then, a cold, silent fury. She had been played. Not just beaten, but utterly and completely outmaneuvered by a man she had dismissed as insignificant. She had handed him the keys to a kingdom she hadn't even known she possessed. She looked at David, her eyes blazing. "You knew. You brought this to me." "I brought you the offer as you instructed," David said, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. "I advised you of the liability clause. The decision to sell was yours." Madam Sterling, for the first time in his career, he was not afraid of her. He was seeing her clearly, and he was seeing the quiet, flannel-shirted men from the inspection in a new light. He was seeing the difference between power and substance. Catherine did not fire David. She needed him. She needed information. "Get me everything you can on Vance Precision," she ordered. "Their financials, their other clients, their supply chain. Everything. And get Henderson in my office. Now." The meeting with Henderson, the sycophantic head of her Apex Dynamics subsidiary, was short and brutal. He was fired before he even had a chance to sit down, blamed for losing the contract that had brought this whole nightmare to light. It was a meaningless gesture, a queen sacrificing a pawn long after the king was already in checkmate. 2 weeks later, after her best analysts had come back with a terrifying report on Vance Precision's capabilities and market position, Catherine Sterling did something she had never done before. She requested a meeting. She did not summon. She requested. The meeting was not in a boardroom. Elias agreed to meet her at his factory. She arrived in her black chauffeured Maybach, a lacquered Beetle gliding to a stop in the gravel parking lot filled with the pickup trucks and sensible sedans of his employees. She stepped out, her tailored silk suit and Italian leather heels looking absurdly out of place. Elias did not make her wait, but he did not rush to greet her. He met her at the door to the main office, dressed in his usual work pants and a clean, dark blue button-down shirt. He was not smiling. He was not gloating. His expression was one of polite, neutral inquiry. He led her to his office, a simple, functional room with a large window overlooking the humming factory floor. Lily's drawings were taped to one wall. Catherine stood at the window, watching the seamless flow of work below. She saw men and women moving with a quiet purpose she had never witnessed in her own sprawling, inefficient factories. She saw the gleam of new and refurbished machinery operating in perfect harmony. She was looking at a perfect engine of creation, and she had given it away. She turned to face him, recovering her composure, falling back on her usual tactics. "Mr. Vance. Elias. You've done remarkable work here," she began with the feint, the offer of praise. "I was blind. I admit it. You saw potential where I only saw liability. That's a rare gift." Elias said nothing. He just watched her, his dark eyes calm and unreadable. "There's no need for us to be adversaries," she continued, moving to the main attack. "I am prepared to make you a very generous offer to acquire Vance Precision. We can fold it into Sterling Capital as a premier division. You would have unlimited resources, a global reach. Name your price. I'll write the check myself." Elias let the silence stretch, a silence that was more powerful than any shouted retort. He looked past her, out the window at the factory floor, at the team he had assembled, the work they were doing. He then looked back at her. "We are not for sale," he said. The statement was flat, absolute. There was no room for negotiation. Catherine's facade cracked slightly. A flicker of frustration. "Don't be sentimental. Everything is for sale. Let's be practical. You need a distribution network. You need capital for the next phase of expansion. I can provide that. We are profitable," Elias said simply. "We have a waiting list of clients. We are expanding at our own pace, without debt. We have everything we need. The final, desperate gambit. The threat. You are in a competitive industry, Mr. Vance. A very competitive one. Sterling Capital has deep pockets. We can make things very difficult for a small operation like yours. We can undercut your prices, poach your suppliers. Elias held up a hand, a simple, quiet gesture that nonetheless stopped her mid-sentence. He picked up a single sheet of paper from his desk and held it out to her. It was a price quote. She took it, confused. Her eyes scanned the document. It was a proposal from Vance Precision to Apex Dynamics, her own subsidiary. It was a quote for the fabrication of a new, critical component that Apex's own engineers had been unable to produce, a failure that was causing a cascade of delays in one of her most important contracts. Your team at Apex submitted a request for quotation 3 days ago, Elias explained, his voice even. Their design is flawed, but the underlying concept is sound. We have corrected the design. That is our price to fabricate the components you need to avoid defaulting on your contract with the Department of Defense. Catherine stared at the paper. The price was high. It was fair for the work involved, but it was high. It would erase almost all the profit from her own contract. She was trapped. To succeed, she needed him. The men she had evicted, the men she had mocked, the men whose genius she had so casually discarded, was now the only one who could save her. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely and irrevocably inverted. She looked up from the paper, the full scope of her defeat finally settling upon her. She saw no triumph in his eyes, no satisfaction, no revenge. She saw only a quiet master craftsman, a man who was focused on the work, on solving the problem. The fact that she was part of the problem was, to him, incidental. I'll have my people review this, she said, her voice a strained whisper. It was a surrender. Take your time, Elias said. We have a full production schedule, he stood, a clear signal that the meeting was over. Catherine Sterling walked out of Vance Precision, past the purposeful employees and the humming machines, a ghost in her own failed narrative. She got into her Maybach and was driven away, the price quote clutched in her hand like a death warrant for her own arrogance. Elias watched her car disappear down the road. He then turned his attention to the empty lot where his garage once stood. The next day, a landscaping crew arrived. They did not break ground for a new building. They laid down rich topsoil, planted mature oak trees, and installed elegant stone benches. They built a small, beautiful park. A few weeks later, a simple, elegant sign was mounted on the brick facade of the factory. It did not have a flashy logo. It just had 2 words, cut from brushed stainless steel, Vance Precision. The story concluded, but the work did not. Vance Precision grew, not explosively, but steadily, organically. It became a benchmark for quality in the industry, a place where the most difficult engineering problems were sent to be solved. Elias Vance never appeared on the cover of a business magazine. He gave no interviews. He remained a quiet, methodical man who found his satisfaction in the hum of a well-run machine and the quiet pride of a job well done. He remained a father who made it home for dinner every night. The park on the land where his old garage stood became a favorite spot for his employees to eat lunch, a quiet green space in a world of concrete and steel. Sometimes, in the late afternoon, Elias would sit there with Lily, watching the light change on the face of the factory, the building he had seen for what it truly was. He had not sought to defeat Catherine Sterling. He had simply focused on building something of value, and her world of superficial metrics and hollow transactions had crumbled in the face of it. His victory was not in her defeat, but in the quiet, solid reality of what he had built with his own hands, his own mind, and the help of the good people he had gathered around him. He had won by refusing to play her game, and by creating his own. And in the end, that was the only victory that ever truly mattered. David Chen's resume arrived the following Monday. Elias hired him, not as an assistant, but as an apprentice on the factory floor, offering him a chance to learn the difference between processing a transaction and creating real value.